Hey, welcome. Today I'm talking with Barrett Burgin. He is the director and writer. Was there any other roles that you did in that besides those? I know
Um,
independent, there's usually a lot.
yeah, I was one of the executive producers, so I helped fund the film.
Okay.
And I was actually the co-writer. So Mason D. Davis wrote it with me. It was originally my idea, my story. I pitched to him, and he actually plays the soldier in the film, and so
All
he was
right.
an exec producer and an actor on
Yeah.
there. And then I guess I might have been able to give myself a producer credit just from the kind of run and gun nature of indie filmmaking. But I had two great producers on there as well who definitely
And
deserved it.
we're talking about your film Cryo,
That's
which is
correct.
coming out this year. It's been going around on the film festival circuit, and I
Yep.
was able to meet with you, and we saw it in the screening at Film Quest in Provo, Utah. And just as we were kind of getting into this, you're saying that you've had a number of other festivals you've been accepted in. You want
Yeah.
some of the others that you've done?
Sure. So we were an official selection last year back at for CineQuest, the Desertscape International Film Festival. We were in the Kanab Film Festival. These are local kind of Utah, really cool Utah festivals. Um, we also in some of kind of the horror genre, thriller, sci-fi festivals. We were in the Chattanooga Film Festival. We just after Cryo, or just before FilmQuest, Cryo played as part of the Flicker's Rhode Island Film Festival, their sci-fi portion of that called Vortex, and we actually won best sci-fi feature at that festival. So we're really honored. And then after FilmQuest, um, uh, Cryo played at Blood in the Snow in Canada and the Soho Horror Film Festival in London. And so we have one more. We know we've gotten into the Zion's Indie Film Festival here in Utah, and that should kind of close our festival run. So yeah, a lot of good stuff. We're really proud of.
Okay. Do you want to give a quick description of how you pitch Cryo to someone that's wanting to see it?
Yes, absolutely. So Cryo's kind of a whodunit sci-fi murder mystery about five scientists who wake up from cryo sleep. They don't know how long they've been asleep. They can't even remember their names, and they wake up in this underground kind of bunker facility, very large facility, all these winding labyrinth rooms. And they meet one another and they try to kind of work out, why are we awake? Who are we? How long have we been asleep? And they start to piece together some of the details. Oh, we think we were doing an experiment maybe to test cryosleep. Well, as they wander around, they discover the scene of a murder. There's all of this blood. There's a machete lodged in the door. And they realize that either someone is down there with them or one of them is not telling the truth about who they really are. As the movie unfolds, of course, there's kind of some twists and turns, and it ends up being something a little different than what you think it is. But yeah, I hope it's a thrilling kind of slow burn mystery for anybody who watches it.
Okay. So as you're talking about, this is all filmed in a bunker.
Yeah.
So here we are in Utah. We know a little bit about that, but what was your inspiration for coming up with the script of Cryo?
Well, that's a great question. I originally kind of started toying around with the general idea of scientists waking up from cryosleep, like maybe 7 or 8 years ago, with a good buddy of mine I just went to high school with. And, you know, he helped me with movies when we were in high school, and we were just kind of toying around with this. And I realized that is sort of an archetypal stereotypical setup. There's a lot of movies that do that. I actually had not seen some of these before making Cryo, but I've watched them since. So like Cube kind of is set up the same way. There's I understand that Dark Matter kind of has some of those same ideas. There's even some that have come out recently. Again, just a scientist waking up, not able to remember who they are. So I wanted to put a really unique spin on it. And so that's sort of where Mason and I started talking about, well, what could make this original if we sort of explored the twist of identity and trying to remember who one is and like what makes us who we are and the way that we behave. And that's where we started getting into some of these kind of themes of determinism. I pulled a lot from Annihilation. I pulled a lot from Westworld season 1, and just sort of some of the, without giving the ending away, kind of some of what's really going on. And that's the actual movie. The rest of it is sort of paint on top of the the concept and the theme they're trying to get at. And so, yeah, that it all just came from questions of kind of wondering why we behave the way we do, and how that would be the different or the same if you were to change some of the factors. That's all I can say, really.
So you're also talking about this bunker scene. I mean, this whole thing is kind of done on the underground. In fact,
Yeah,
the underground of Provo.
that's right. It was
Or
right next to where we had Film
yeah.
Quest. I mean, it's less than a block away from where it was showing, which is why we consider Film Quest kind of our home festival, homecoming festival.
But what was probably one of the hardest things about filming in such a limited space or confined area in terms of, because you couldn't spread out?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Initially, right off the bat, it's easy to remember the things that were easy about it, simply
Okay.
because it was all together. We booked the Airbnb down there from the guy who manages it, and he gave us free access to just everything. And so that was convenient, kind of having like a ready-made film set every room for an indie film that's on location. That was amazing. I think one of the difficult challenges was you're underground, you're under restaurants and stores and a mall. And so working around sound of footsteps and whatnot at night, it was really creepy, really strange. Also just some of the things, like we're under pipes and plumbing. And so we'd hear like whooshing, and sometimes we even had liquid drop on people. And so it was really gunky and just kind of gross. And you're right. I guess one disadvantage is we tried to lean into it in the film, but it's hard to know the geography of the space. It's even if you're not filming down there, just wandering down there, you get lost. It's so kind of labyrinth-like, and so the film really has no good sense of space. You don't know what's connected to what, and it's just all just kind of a series of rooms. And so, yeah, that made it a little bit challenging.
Now, that connection of space like you're talking about, do you personally, I think that kind of plays into the film.
I do too. Yeah, we tried to lean into it. It made it challenging, and we decided to make a creative limitation something that we just leaned into instead of tried to avoid. But certainly there's only so many angles too that you can use down there, just because a lot of the spaces are so confined. Oh, here's another thing that we did. Whenever you see the cryo chamber, the different chambers in the film, we're using every angle of the same room just to try to kind of create more space than there is down there. So that was pretty interesting.
Okay. So Barrett, you mentioned that this Cryo is your debut feature film. So you've done some shorts.
Yes.
This one came out as your first feature. What would you say is the biggest challenge difference between doing a feature versus a short?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I was on a podcast a few months ago where I answered a question similar to this, where I basically said that I almost don't think of it as my debut feature, because I made it while I was a film student. And so I almost think of it like a student feature, in the same way that I hope to make movies one day at the level of, say, Damien Chazelle. People think of Whiplash as his first film. Well, technically, he made a feature back when he was a student. And so for me, that added another layer of complication, as this was sort of my student feature film. So one, maybe wait and hold off and trying to make a movie until you're done with your coursework, because that actually made it complicated on such a tight deadline shooting over the summer. But secondly, I think something that makes shooting a feature and directing a feature much harder than a short is maintaining such a long vision in your head as a director. I mean, you've really got to know your material. For a short, you can, it can be 10, 12 pages, and you've kind of got it all succinct and you know how everything connects. For a feature, you have to be able to do that, but it takes a lot more work, a lot more time, and it's easier to get lost along the way. You've got to kind of keep in mind, like, oh, this is what we shot 2 weeks ago, and make sure that it all kind of connects really well. I'd also say just gathering the funds and the enthusiasm of, in our case, kind of a hybrid crew of students and professionals, just maintaining that passion, that energy throughout the whole project is essential. And it's much more of a challenge, especially when you're kind of doing guerrilla style filmmaking that we were doing. That said, Daniel, I think it's like 5 times as rewarding to shoot a feature. Once you're into those, like a week or two in, you really start to get in the groove and be like, man, like I could do this the rest of my life. I mean, this is really, really good. Your crew ends up having more synthesis over a longer period of time. And I think that you just get better as you go with so much time with the cast, with the crew. I even kind of wish we had gone back and reshot some of the very first stuff that we did, which is the earliest part of the film, which I think is actually its weakest point. I'm proud that Cryo just gets better and better as it goes. But I wish we'd gone back and redone some of what we did first, just when we were finding our footing and whatnot.
Okay. So one thing about Cryo, it hints at a much bigger world. Is there any plans to expand the story out into the world?
That's a great question. I had one of our crew members ask me, like, so when are we doing the sequel? And I had to laugh at that because I can't explain it unless you watch the film. But I was like, what do you mean? That question doesn't apply to this story. And so if you watch it, the only thing I could maybe do is a prequel. And funny enough, in my headcanon, I do have a lot of like how this all happened and who the inventor is and how it all came together. So I don't have any immediate plans to further explore the world of Cryo. I think that it kind of works best as its own little kind of contained story. That said, I have thought about doing a novelization adaptation of it and trying to explore the same twist in novel form, which would be very difficult to do because there's so much we do visually. And I like the challenge of that. And what you can get away with in a book is you can go so much further into what all the characters are thinking, the suspicions they have toward each other, and backstory and kind of how they got to that point. So yeah, that's a great question.
So if you're not looking at expanding out on the world of Cryo, what are you working on next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have 2 features, kind of buns in the oven, if you will. The first, actually, the more developed of the 2 is a horror film, period piece. It's actually a Mormon polygamy horror, with like evil spirits, and it's in southern Utah, kind of on the frontier. And I'm very, very excited for this piece. We have a great script. We're on our 5th draft right now. My writer and I, we've been developing this story for years. Very scary, very unique. I've never seen anything like it. We're kind of trying to pull from some sources of inspiration with period horror, like The Witch or the others, but this is quite unique. Or maybe The Exorcist in its sort of exploration of theology, Catholic theology. And then I also have a what I would call kind of a cerebral romantic hypnosis thriller, kind of in the veins of Vertigo or Gone Girl, about 2 characters and lots of twists. Some of the advice I got after I made Cryo, somebody in the industry told me, studios love to see you do something a second time. And so just like Cryo is very cerebral and kind of twisty and has all these layers, this is another shot at doing a story like that. Very different, but would feel very much like Cryo. So I guess to your question, nothing in the world of Cryo, but certainly kind of scratching that same itch, if you will, to try to make something really complete and sort of mind bender thriller.
So let me ask you a couple questions more, you might say a little bit more personal.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not so much on the film, but as a filmmaker.
Okay.
Just briefly, what is a film or films, movie or movies, that you found inspiration from for what you like to do, and why those films?
That's an excellent question. I mentioned Vertigo, Alfred Hitchcock. I go back to that all the time. You can kind of see some of what I'm doing with in Cryo and in my short film The Next Door, in Vertigo. Some of the way the story kind of moves. The Prestige, Christopher Nolan's film, The Prestige, is a huge inspiration to me. I love David Fincher as a filmmaker. Seven, Gone Girl, those are huge inspirations. Alex Garland, especially his early stuff, Ex Machina and Annihilation. Hopefully there's kind of some flavors of that in Cryo. But if I had to say if I had to pick one piece that I just return to over and over again, well, I'd be amiss not to say Spielberg with Raiders, particularly kind of Spielberg's escapism stuff, and Miyazaki, and you know, a number of excellent filmmakers. But the one that I go back to over and over again is The Prestige. For whatever reason, I saw it when I was like in 6th or 7th grade, and it just had a huge impact on me, that I just kept returning to it and finding little nuggets, finding stuff that I missed over and over and over again. And ever since then, I think I've been trying to almost kind of make The Prestige in trying to put little details and make sure that it all works kind of as a complete sort of circle. And yeah, I watch it pretty much every year and just find new little ideas and concepts in there.
Okay. Another question kind of along these lines. If you're talking to someone that's come to you and say, hey, I want to become a filmmaker, what advice would you give them?
I guess it would depend a little bit on their age. If they're younger than me, you know, let's say they're a teenager or they're early in college, my advice would be, one, don't, unless you have to, unless it's just in you, right? And that's not because I don't like it. I love it, but it's just such an intense process and industry. I don't think it's because, oh, your chances are slim, kid, or anything. No, if somebody has the drive and the passion and the talent, they will make it. Like they'll find an avenue to make movies. I think it more has to do with, if you don't love it, then you kind of hate it. That's what I've seen. And so they need to discover in themselves, is this a hobby, or is this something you want to do? If it's a hobby, great, make it a hobby and write little things that are accessible, especially with the democratization of technology and gear. So that'd be the first thing, is like scrutinize whether this is something you really want to do. The second thing, start immediately. Just start making stuff. Start making stuff, even if it sucks, and practice. Watch good movies. Don't just watch popular stuff. Watch excellent stuff. Watch critically acclaimed stuff that's been popular over a long period of time. I think in some ways we've forgotten a lot as a culture of the craft. And then if they were older than me, let's say they're in their, you know, middle-aged or a little bit older, I would say, don't try to make a career out of it. Don't pivot. Just dabble and explore and make something, you know, or if you're really going to jump in, study and practice, and then use the resources that you have at an older age to make something legitimate. So I don't know if that's good advice, but that's advice I live by, and I feel like I've seen evidence of in my life.
Okay. So you're just finishing up on your festival circuit for Cryo.
Yeah.
Have you been approached, or is there any plans for distribution?
Oh yeah, no, actually, so we distributed it even with it playing in FilmQuest. Jonathan Martin made an exception for Cryo because I submitted an altered cut for the festival. But we actually had distribution secured through Saban Films. And so it's had a theatrical release, and it is widely available through Saban on Apple TV, Amazon, Vudu, YouTube TV, even Direct TV. It's basically available to rent or buy all over the place. And Saban has just been super awesome to work with. We felt extremely lucky to go from sort of a student summer project to selling it to Saban, and yeah, so it's available to rent or buy anywhere. And we're proud that it's still played in some of these festivals, even with the distribution deal.
All right, that sounds great. I'm glad to see that we can find it someplace else, so I can let people know where.
Yeah.
Any final words you'd like to say?
I think maybe just, you know, Cryo has been extremely divisive. It's played really well at a lot of festivals and seems to be winning quite a few awards. But I understand a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people actually downright hate the movie, and I know why they do. I get why they do. It's very long. It's very slow. but we made it that way intentionally, and I'm extremely proud of it. One of the other critics who was there at FilmQuest told me he said it's the most divisive movie he's seen in a long time, and that he thinks that a lot of viewers who watch it don't actually understand it or understand what they're watching, and aren't paying particular attention. Now, don't get me wrong, Daniel, that doesn't mean it's a perfect movie. I know it has problems. I know that there's a lot of growth that I'm look forward to having as a filmmaker. And admittedly, I mean, I shot it like 3 or 4 years ago. It took a while with COVID, and so I hopefully I've grown a lot as a filmmaker. But one thing I would say is, if you're going to watch Cryo, pay very close attention. Be ready for it to be a slow burn. The trailer kind of presents it as this fast-paced thriller, but that's not how the pacing works of the movie. It goes slow and then it ramps up high, kind of exponentially toward the end. And so yeah, that's my only thing is and the other thing I would say is pay very close attention to whatever feels like continuity errors. They're extremely intentional, and they're sort of part of the multi-layering that's going on in Cryo, which it was surprising to see how many people those kind of fooled them, and they read as mistakes or continuity errors. But the critics and the viewers who did catch it and figure out either partway through or by the end what we were really going for seemed to really love it. And so that's meant a lot to me, and I'm glad that it's at least found somewhat of an audience. So
I'm going to just cap off with something along those lines. I would tell everybody that's watching, when you go to watch this film, watch for the foreshadowing. There are clues almost from the very beginning about what's happening here. And
yeah.
I found that very good, because I'm very much into story. I review not only movies, but I also review books and tabletop games, as people know me for. So it's very much into the story of it. And I caught some of those things early on going, wait a minute, what about, and I won't say what it was, but there was something right near the start that immediately caught my attention going, we're going someplace with that right there. And then, like you said, it just builds as you go along until you kind of go, yep, got it. So
yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Daniel. I thought we were giving it away. I was like, it's too obvious. It's too obvious. And we even added more of those things. And then I learned from M. Night Shyamalan doing, kind of his big twists in his films. He felt that way about The Sixth Sense. And of course, Cryo's no Sixth Sense. I mean, that's a masterpiece. But we emulated that. And then my producers, my crew were like, you're giving it away, man. Don't, like, pull back. And I'm like, no, more. And it's been interesting to me how many people miss that and feel like, oh, this doesn't make any sense by then. I'll say one thing, for all of its faults, there are hardly any plot holes in the movie. And a lot of people are like, oh, there's plot holes. That's a plot hole. This is a plot hole. And I'm like, no. I promise you, we gave a lot of thought to every little thing. There aren't mistakes in that things. Now, are there problems with the pace? Is there some maybe acting things that I could have directed better, or are there, character motivation issues? Yeah, sure. I would admit that I could grow in that area, but the plotting we really paid attention to. So I really appreciate your positive view of the film, and that you're one of the prime viewers who totally got kind of what we were winking at with the audience. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Barrett, for joining me for this interview. And what I'm going to tell everybody is I recommend Cryo for the viewers that like a science fiction, like Barrett's been saying, a slower burn, but it's a suspense type build and thriller, so that when you're building those clues and you're looking for those little hints as they start come together, it gives you a really nice feeling of satisfaction that you got the story.
Thanks,
All
Daniel.
right. Thank you, and good luck with your film. And like he said, you can find it on all sorts of platforms. So keep a lookout.